7, 8, 9, 10. This is Ken Perenyi. You're listening to My Alien Life.
My first real fascination to try to make a fake was actually with Dutch and Flemish paintings. And what I did was I noted that a lot of these paintings, like, say, Van Goyen, who was a famous Dutch painter of river scenes going back in the 1600s. Many of these paintings, of his paintings, were very similar, one after the other, like a series of paintings. And people and places and boats were rearranged, but they were often the same figures, the same boats, and the same buildings.
In the studio tonight, one of the greatest art forgers in American modern history. Ken Perenyi is so good at what he does, one of his paintings sold for over $700,000 at auction. Tonight, we look into the life of an art forger. That and more, coming right up on My Alien Life. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
My guest tonight has made a small fortune forging works by popular 18th and 19th century artists like Martin Johnson Head, Gilbert Stuart, and Charles Bird King. Ken Perenyi estimates that hundreds of his fakes remain in circulation, and they have been done so well that the world may never know their whereabouts. Ken Perenyi, thank you so much for joining me, and welcome.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And tonight I'd like you to tell your story because in your book, Caveat Emptor, The Secret Life of an American Forger, my listeners probably haven't heard the story, and it's an incredible story, which basically it's repeated itself for hundreds of years because art forgery isn't new, is it?
No, it goes back all the way back to ancient Rome. Even Michelangelo dabbled in forgery when he was young. And they've always been around. They've always been operating, and all the way up to the present age. So I finally had my turn at it.
Well, I throw that word out there, art forger. Evidently, you don't have a problem with that. I mean, it has some negative connotations, but then again, after this long historic tradition, it's one of those things that maybe might not be popular, but it's something that we can live with and something that we can talk about.
Well, there's a debate that's been going on in the art world for some time about the validity of forgeries, if you want to call them that. And that is whether, are they valid works of art in their own right? I believe that they are. I think it takes a great deal of skill and practice and knowledge and understanding to create a successful fake. And I think they have a valid place in the art market and in the art world. Indeed, there's auction houses in London in the past several years, they've had sales of fake. So there is a genuine appreciation for them out there, and they're interesting. It shows the mind of an artist that is working to emulate another painter. How well could that be done? Is it possible? Is it possible to fool experts? Is it possible to sell it for a lot of money? Is it a beautiful work of art in its own right? And that, for me, that's actually the most important point of all.
And I think there's no doubt that there's a skill there, absolutely. And you're capturing a personality of a person, a history, a story, and like you said, the mind of the artist. And so let's go back a few years. When did you actually first realize that you had art potential inside of you?
Well, for me, I was introduced to the art world when I was 17. I was 17 in 1967. It was a great year to be 17. It was the high point of the hippie movement, which I guess most of your younger readers, listeners, would probably have to read history books to find out about today. But it was a great time.
There were hippies.
To be young. And I lived in New Jersey, where I was born and raised, just across the Hudson River from New York City. To make a long story short, in '67, I had an accidental meeting with an artist and his friends, his art world friends, that had rented a crumbling old estate on the Palisade Cliffs overlooking the Hudson River and New York City. And this artist, by the name of Tom Daly, was a very talented man, wanted to use this house, this neo-Gothic style house, which was known as the castle by locals. It was leased by him to use as a studio. It was in Fort Lee, New Jersey, right by the George Washington Bridge. I had an accidental meeting with Tom or some of his friends, and I was invited to join them at the castle and have some fun. It was a great time. It was they had a lot of parties there and so on, and I was a local kid, and I knew Jersey, showed them around and everything, and I started tagging along with these folks, going to galleries, museums, art shows in the city, and I had no plans of becoming an artist. I had no ambitions in that area, and I had no knowledge of art or what it was. But by going to the museums with them and looking at paintings, I began to feel that I had an ability, that I understood the way they were painted. I looked very carefully at the old masters that were on display at the Metropolitan, and something told me that if I had paints and brushes, I could paint pictures also. I wanted very much to fit in with my new friends at the castle. They were artistic. They were doing exciting things over in the city, in the art world, and I wanted to be one of them. They were mostly about 10 years older than me, this group of people. And so Tom Daly gave me paints and brushes one day, and I started making copies of old masters, and they were remarkably good. Tom was very excited when he saw what I was able to do, and by default, because I wasn't pursuing any other vocation in life, or I didn't have any plans of going to college, but by default, I started calling myself an artist And I guess you could say I learned to paint by osmosis. I looked at the paintings at the museum, and I watched Tom, my friend, and he was, I guess you could call my mentor also. I watched him paint a lot. I spent a lot of time at the studio at the castle, and I looked very carefully at the way Tom used the brush and the way he made the brush form things and the way he mixed paints and everything. So I learned to paint by osmosis. I was, I guess, an artist by default. And I wanted to be a painter, and I wanted to move into New York City and be part of the art world. However, you probably want to know how I got into forgery. And
let me ask you this though, did you have any favorites back then? I mean, when you were trying to emulate some of these artists, who were your favorites?
You know, at first I didn't have favorites, and I went into the museum as a blank slate. I was, as I said, I was tagging along with my friends that like to go to the Met on Sunday afternoons, particularly. And I was looking at all these grand paintings, beautiful paintings, and I didn't know who painted them. I had no idea where they were painted, when they were painted, what schools they were, whether they were French, Italian, or anything. And I recommend that type of approach to a lot of people that contact me, and they want to know how did you get into art? How do you get such a great understanding of art? And I went into the Metropolitan and I started enjoying paintings, to just look at them. I didn't care what school or who painted them or the names on the plates and the placards on them or anything. And I discovered that after this type of exposure, after a few trips with my friends, I felt I wanted to go back on my own. I didn't want to be escorted around or following anyone around. I wanted to go back on my own. And there was certain paintings that captivated me, or they fascinated me in some way. Perhaps I found them particularly beautiful or interesting from a historic point. And by going to the museum on my own, I began to write down names of painters and looking at the dates and realizing, wow, this artist, an artist that became one of my favorites, Francesco Guardi, the Italian Venetian painter of the 18th century. I would take a little card and a pen and write down his name. And now I knew who he was and when he painted. And not far from the Metropolitan, there was a large Rizzoli bookstore, which specializes in art books, as you know. And I would stroll down there, down Fifth Avenue, go to Rizzoli's, and they had all these small books on all kinds of artists, particularly Italian artists, European painters, old masters. And for about $3, I would buy a small book on the artist I was just observing. And now I could read about the artist and look at pictures of his work. And so I started building on that. And every time I went to the Metropolitan, I would find another painter that captivated my attention, and perhaps buy a small book about him and read about him. And my favorite painters was, I liked Italian art. I liked French. I liked one of my all-time favorite paintings was a man by the name of Hubert Robert. He lived in 18th century Paris, and he was famous for his romantic paintings of ruins that he observed down around Rome and Naples and so on. He was the painter of ruins. And I liked a lot of these fanciful romantic paintings, and Francesco Guardi was very much like that too. They specialized in one area they specialized in was called the Capriccio, which was a romantic depiction of ruins in a beautiful and sometimes imaginary or Italianate landscape. And that was the sort of thing that captivated me at first. Then I started spending time in the Dutch galleries in the Metropolitan, and I liked the Dutch painters and the Flemish painters very much. So, in my own painting, it was noted by my friend Tom that I had a proclivity in emulating the technique of the old masters. Well, that's what I was learning from. I was learning by observing the way the old masters created their paintings. I was very good at looking at paintings closely to understand the way the painting was arranged to depict the image that the artist was expressing in the painting. I was very good at, well, I guess what you could call back engineering a painting.
Can I ask you a question about that? Because this is, so when you're talking about Francesco Guardi and Hubert Robert, you're looking at, you're looking at structure, but a lot of detail. And the thing about that really strikes me and makes me wonder how you could do this is the context, because they painted places, and
right.
in a different country, far away. So
right.
how does one who's never been there, or did you actually go to these places to study on how to do that?
No, what I did is
we're probably jumping way ahead there, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, no, it's okay. My first real fascination to try to make a fake was actually with Dutch and Flemish paintings. And what I did was I noted that a lot of these paintings, like, say, Van Goyen, who was a famous Dutch painter of river scenes going back in the 1600s, many of these paintings, of his paintings, were very similar, one after the other, like series of paintings. And people and places and boats were rearranged, but they were often the same figures, the same boats, and the same buildings, reorganized in new paintings. And to answer your question, kind of a long story, and I won't go into it in detail, but I go into it in my book, Caveat Emptor. I was 17, I was 18, and I loved sports cars. I was a normal kid, and I had an vintage cars. I loved vintage cars, and I had some friends that were my own age. We bought these broken down vintage cars, and we fixed them up. In those days, you could get them cheap. And I was driving around in an old Bentley, a 1936 sports salon. It was a beautiful old car, Bentley. And I had restored the car, and it was expensive. I needed money to buy gas, and parts were extraordinarily expensive for this car. And I was lamenting one day to my friend Tom at the castle that I needed a voltage regulator for the Bentley. It was like $300, which was a fortune. And he was, as a lark, he gave me a book on art forgery. It was a story of Van Meegeren. He was a famous art forger back in the 40s. And he kind of half-jokingly said, look, why don't you follow this guy's example? He needed money, too. He painted some fake Vermeers, and he sold them, and he became rich. Well, I read the book, and the book went into detail about how a forgery is created that can fool an expert. And I was already making very fine copies of various small copies of old masters, but very fine. I had amazed my friend Tom. So I thought, well, maybe I could make a Flemish portrait, something in the order of like a small Van Eyck or a Memling, something like that. And I understood the principles that were put forth in the book to create a fake, an old master, how it had to be created on a period or antique support, meaning a canvas or a wooden panel. I chose to work on a wooden panel that I scavenged from an antique piece of furniture. And it was not a problem for me to study the Flemish portraits in the Metropolitan and design one of my own invention, which I did. And I transferred it onto a small, may have been a 10 by 12 inch wooden panel that I had. I painted it, I cracked it, I followed the general ideas I learned in this book about Van Meegeren, but I also improvised my own techniques to age and forge the painting. And I created three portraits, and I picked out the best one. And I got up the courage to walk in, take it over to New York City, across the bridge. And I walked into a gallery on East 57th Street that specialized in old master paintings and decorative art objects from the Renaissance and so on. And the proprietor there, a man by the name of Efron Gallery, had been there for many, many years, studied the painting very carefully. Well, it was a very nerve-wracking, as you can imagine, for me to sit there and have him looking at it and examining it. And so on. I was almost having a heart attack there. I was 18. But he determined that it was antique. And an hour later, I was walking out of his gallery with $800 cash, which was a lot of money at that time. That was 68. And I got my Bentley fixed up and gave some of my girlfriends rides around town and had a lot of fun. Life was good. And so eventually a forgery from that point on was, it was an element for me to make some fast money. And I also found it thrilling and fascinating to be able to design and paint a picture in the style of a long dead artist from, the past. And, but I didn't look upon it as any kind of a career in any sense of the word. I was limited. I was mostly limited. I wasn't painting Guardis or anything. I loved Guardi. I loved Hubert Robert, but they were beyond my ability at that time. But I was developing these Dutch paintings in the style of Van Ruysdael and Flemish paintings, which are earlier, and I had those on the side to raise some quick cash whenever I needed. But I moved into New York City because I was determined to be part of the downtown art scene at that time. It was very exciting. Soho was being developed as a big art community. Artists from all over the world were moving in there into these old lofts and studios and restoring dilapidated townhouses and buildings down there. Boutiques were moving in, restaurants. It was a very exciting time. And I got my first studio on Fifth Avenue and 11th Street in a historic building, the Stanford White Building at number 43, which is just north of Washington Square Park. And I actually rented a beautiful old studio in there for $110 a month. Sounds incredible today. today you couldn't touch that building. It's a landmark, but it's like the Dakota of downtown. It's a moated building, and it's very famous and everything. But at that time, it was run down. It was really run down, and it had an ancient electrical system in it that limited what you were able to plug in to your rooms and everything. So there was all kinds of people living in there, and I got this beautiful little studio with a terrace for 110. I was living in there, and I wanted to design and plan out a collection of abstract impressionist paintings and be part of the contemporary movement downtown, of which I had already been circulating in that world. My friends from the castle knew everybody in the art world. I had visited Bryce Marden in his gallery and other famous artists, and we hung out at a bar downtown. It was called Max's Kansas City, and this was the hangout for all artists that were famous and those that wanted to become famous. This was the place to be. It was the place where you could meet the right people, the agents, the patrons, and it attracted all kinds of people in the arts, famous photographers, models, beautiful models, and international playboys, and what we called the beautiful people hung out there. It was a very exciting place to be, and probably something that only happens once in a generation. But Max's was the bar to hang out, and that's where you could meet people, and I did too. And eventually, I moved out of my cozy little studio on the 11th floor of number 43 Fifth, and I moved into a dilapidated, wretched, stinking loft with one of Tom Daly's friends from the castle, who rented this place just off Union Square. His name was Tony. Tony Masaccio.
Tony.
And Tony was one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. He was he came from an old mafia family in Brooklyn, and he was one of these people that was born with amazing genes. He was fantastically handsome. He was the kind of person you look at and you wonder how do people turn out like this. He was charming. He was very, very intelligent, and he moved in the artistic circles in downtown at that time. He knew everybody in the art world. He'd had drinks with Leo Castelli. He hobnobbed with all the big name artists. They loved him. He was a drinking buddy of Larry Rivers and other big name artists. He knew everybody. He knew all the critics. He knew the gallery owners. And Tony rented this horrible, stinking, depressing loft off Union Square. And I needed space to put my abstract impressionist collection together. And I sold a few fakes. I got money up for the move and the supplies I would need to put this collection together. And I left my place at Fifth. I moved into this loft on Union Square, and I began my serious career as an abstract impressionist painter. And it was a very tough life there. It was cold, it was dingy, but I was putting a very exciting collection together. And I kept myself alive by occasionally selling another Dutch fake to various shops around in the city for whatever I could get. Sometime I would get 800 again, 900, 1,000, 1,200, even something like that. It was all in those price range, anywhere from 7 to like 1,200. But that was good money in those days. That could last me 3 months, because things were a lot cheaper then, of course. But that's where art forgery was for the moment, and I was getting a lot of interest from important people concerning the collection I was building in the loft. We were right near Max's, so every night I could go there with Tony and hang out, and and Andy Warhol had his building just half a block away from us, right on Union Square. We were just off Union Square. Wow. Yeah, and Andy was there, and I had the attention of Robert Hughes, the famous art critic for Time magazine, and he was interested in what I was doing. I had a lot going for me, and I had a very original idea for a collection, which I go into detail in my book. But fate seemed to intervene and conspire against me, and it all came to a very sudden end. We didn't have a bathtub in the loft, and it was very difficult, especially in the winter. It was cold, it was freezing. I would have to run out to friends that I knew in the city and take a bath once in a while. And I had to get used to going sometimes for like a week without taking a bath, and I had to sleep on a thin mattress on the floor, and it was a tough life, really, in there.
That's the part of the artist, though, that had to suffer a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, and I had I had to stretch my money out, and I was living on hamburgers and French fries. It was just awful. But anyway, I was young, and you could take it. But disaster happened when we tried to install this bathtub. We lived above a restaurant. It was a Jewish dairy restaurant. It was an old restaurant. I had been there for decades. And we installed the bathtub. Tony, he fancied himself some sort of a construction worker, because when he was young, he worked on the Brooklyn Expressway with his mafia friends, with his young mafia friends. They got jobs. He knew Sammy the Bull Gravano, He grew up with people like that, and he got Sammy his first job. He was telling me. Anyway, so Tony had some tools. He tried to install the bathtub. It didn't work out. It was leaking, and we couldn't see the leak the way the tub was constructed. We couldn't see the leak. We were soaking water into the floor. And one night at like 5 o'clock in the winter, in the freezing cold winter, the ceiling caved in on the restaurant down below and showered the people with plaster and water and all. The people thought the building was collapsing. They panicked. They tried to get out of a narrow door. The whole place, they wrecked the whole restaurant down below. And I found that I was evicted from my studio, from where I was building this collection, in the middle of a freezing cold winter in a very bad year in New York City. It was around 70, 71. Not sure right now without my notes. I was evicted. I was thrown out. I was not formally evicted. I mean, the landlord just told me, you pack your crap up and get out of here within a week, or else, So I was in a panic, and it was devastating for me, and to be young and to be thrown out like that, and I only had a few $100s to my name. I didn't have the time to make another fake, and I was wandering around the city in a suicidal depression, wondering, what am I going to do? I have this collection half made. I have practically no money. It's the middle of the winter. You can't find an apartment. And I was just wandering around like a zombie around the city. I didn't know what to do. And but I got lucky. I actually got very, very lucky. One day, I remember to get warmed up. You know, I was making telephone calls and freezing dirty telephone booths, trying to see if somebody needed a roommate, and I was just striking out. Nothing was working for me. And then, to make matters worse, I stepped off of a curb and my foot went into a freezing puddle of freezing cold ice water. I needed that like a hole in the head. I'm walking around the city limping on one leg that's frozen right from frostbite.
Wow.
What else could go wrong? I went into this Greasy Spoon Midtown coffee shop and I got a cup of coffee to try to warm me up for a moment. And when I had to pay the bill, I found a little crumpled up piece of newspaper tucked down in the recess of my wallet. And it was an ad for a studios for rent, that I had torn out of the newspaper when I was searching around and found my little studio on Fifth Avenue. Well, this was uptown, and I had never gone to it because I had gotten in on Fifth, and that was it. But this was laying still down in my wallet. It had been there for a long time, and it was at number 35 East 68th Street. The ad said, "Live in an Upper East Side townhouse for $40 a week," and that's an incredible address, number 35 East. You couldn't touch it today. You'd have to be a multi-millionaire. It's impossible today. But at that time, the city, it was a very different city at that time. It was wide open. You could almost pick your neighborhood and you would find rentals all you want in those days. That was before New York City really became a great international city. And so I wandered up in the cold and I found the townhouse. It was a beautiful old neoclassical style, Rococo style townhouse just off Madison Avenue between Madison and Park. And I had no idea if there would be anything available there, but I went in, walked up the steps, opened up this big iron door with the glass behind it, entered this marble foyer, and there was a woman sitting at a desk there. And and I asked her, "Is there anything available to be rented here?" And she said, and it turned out that the house was broken up into a lot of little studios. And they did indeed rent rooms on a weekly basis for $40 a week. And after a little back and forth, they didn't have anything available. They sent me to another townhouse they own up the street. I came back, and within a week, she had a room for me, this lady there, Mrs. Parker. And I moved out of the loft on Union Square and into a warm, nice little top floor room in this beautiful old townhouse. And I felt like my life had been saved. And I couldn't believe the luck that I was in. I had warmth, I had a warm bed, and it was just fabulous. But I was now living on the Upper East Side. I only had a few $100s to my name, maybe about $300 or $400. And okay, the rent was $40 a month, but I had to figure out, where do I go from here? And my collection isn't even ready. It's all it's still down there in that loft. I have to get that out of there. So Mrs. Parker allowed me to take my collection from the loft and put it in the basement of the townhouse. And I quickly went to work in my tiny garret of a room, and I started planning on designing some more Dutch and Flemish little paintings on wood panels. But it was within a couple of weeks there that I was offered a very grand room down on the first floor, which was the old drawing room of this beautiful old townhouse. And it was a Louis XV style room with murals on the walls and a big marble fireplace and wooden parquet floors. It was just absolutely magnificent. And a big window that looked right out, just right over the street there. You could open up the windows and talk to people walking by on the sidewalk. It was just beautifully situated. But that was $80 a week. So I thought, well, gee, I can't do much up in my room for $40. It's very tiny, but if I could get this place down at $80 a week, which was a lot of money then, I could actually start working again. I could even work on my collection, my contemporary collection. So I took the leap, and I told the squire, yes, I'll take the room, and I moved in there, and I created some Dutch fakes. I went out into the neighborhood on the Upper East Side, which was filled with art dealers up there. I raised some money again, and I was stabilized for the moment, and everything was going good. I was making some money on the side with the fakes. I was working on my contemporary collection again, and I was happy. I was living on the Upper East Side in this magnificent room. But then what happened was, to make a long story short, twice in the same winter, I found that I was being evicted again, this time from the townhouse. The owner of the townhouse, these very wealthy people that lived down on 62nd Street, they decided they wanted to lease out the entire townhouse to a drug rehabilitation clinic on the Upper East Side, on one of the richest, wealthiest streets on the Upper East Side, on 68th Street. They were going to lease the townhouse out to a drug rehabilitation clinic. Right. Okay. It was a brilliant move. And I didn't know what I was going to do. Again, I was given like 2 weeks to get out of the house. I was once again in a suicidal panic, running around the city, still in the winter, finding no place to go. I couldn't believe I was living in this nightmare. So I was down to days before the deadline and had no place to go. And I had just given up. I said, I don't know what to do. I really don't know what to do. Most of the people had left the townhouse, and I'm still sitting there with all this artwork, and I'm getting notices that I better be out by this certain date. So anyway, it turned out a great piece of luck, probably the luckiest thing that ever happened to me in my life, apart from meeting Tom Daly and being introduced to the art world, was that my neighbor next door turned out to be the notorious lawyer Roy Cohn.
Wow.
And he was a historical figure. I don't know how many people know who he is today, but he was very famous in New York City as one of the greatest lawyers of all time. And he was a lawyer to the rich and the famous, and also to the biggest gangsters in the world. He had Carlo Gambino was his. He was one of his clients, and he also was a lawyer to the Newhouse media empire. Wealthy people from all over the world. I mean, the creme de la creme had Roy Cohn as their lawyer. He could do anything. This man, he was very mysterious, and he was notorious, and he was fascinating. He was a very dark figure with all kinds of stories circulated about him in the press and everything, all kinds of rumors about him and everything. And he was my neighbor. And it was suggested to me that I go over and speak to him and tell him that he's going to have, in another week, he's going to have a drug rehabilitation clinic moving into this townhouse that I'm currently still living in. And is there any way to help out in this? And I did. Indeed, I went over there, and I met him, and I told him what was happening, and he was incredulous. He found this hard to believe. And he just asked me point blank, are you willing to stay in your house and not move? He said, you had not been evicted formally. I could keep you there and any other tenants that are willing to fight it. And to make a long story short, that's what I did. I refused to leave on the appointed day. Roy Cohn brought a lawsuit against the owner of the townhouse, these fabulously wealthy people, down on 62nd Street. And for the next 3 years, I was there. I lived there. I worked there. I became a good friend of Roy. Roy was helped me out tremendously in many ways in my life. But most of all, I had to live on. I had to rely more on faking pictures, and I kept developing my Dutch paintings. I was branching out to various different Dutch painters. I couldn't keep making the same artists and the same thing and selling them to galleries around on the Upper East Side. But the big breakthrough in my life came when a friend of Roy's, and I had told Roy what I did, and Roy was amused by it. He thought it was it was interesting that I could do this and make money at it. He was just amused by it. But he had a friend, a restaurateur, that he introduced me to, that was an artist and an art collector himself. He was very wealthy, this guy, and he was having a show in New York City himself at Emmerich Galleries. And we became friends, and Roy told me, his name was Marty, tell Marty what you do. He's cool. Everything is good. He might be able to help you out. And indeed, Marty knew a lot of art collectors and art dealers in New York City. So Marty introduced me to a dealer who began selling my fakes. And after a while, I was working with this dealer, Paul, and Paul said that there was someone that wanted to meet me very badly. And Paul told me he was a famous collector of art. He's eccentric. He lives in a mansion just north of the city, and he's one of the biggest collectors of early American paintings and sculpture in the country. And he has a collection that's beyond price. And this dealer, Paul, showed him some of my works, told him that they were fakes painted by this young man. And this collector, his name was Jimmy Rico, R-I-C-A-U. It's a French name, pronounced Rico. It came from an old New Orleans family. And Jimmy Rico wanted to meet me, and I was brought up to his house up in Nyack. But this is some time past. I'm just abbreviating the story for time's sake. And I was eventually met Jimmy, and I was in his mansion with just unbelievable works of art all over the place. Paintings, sculpture, furniture, the finest collections of empire furniture you can imagine, museum quality pieces, and his paintings. Some of them are in the Metropolitan today. But his pride and joy was his collection, the greatest collection in the world of American 19th century American sculpture. And his works were could rival anything in the greatest museums. As a matter of fact, a lot of his pieces of sculpture were on loan to the Metropolitan, the Brooklyn Museum, the Newark Museum, because he couldn't store them all in this house. So Jimmy was a bit of a rascal. He was eccentric. He was a semi-recluse, and he loved what I did. He thought I was very talented. But he said he had one criticism, and that was he didn't like the idea that I was limited to Dutch painting, and he wanted me to start faking his great love in life, 19th century American paintings. And at that time, by this time we were, this was like around let me get this straight, around 1972, 73, I think. I could be wrong. It was around the early 70s. Jimmy put at my disposal his entire collection, that was a lot of it housed in this beautiful neoclassical American mansion that was built in maybe the late 18th century or early 19th century up in Piermont, New York. It's a beautiful historic town just north of the city, 20 minutes north of New York City. Today it's priceless.
When you say a 19th century American artist, you're not talking about like Mary Cassatt or painting people that are well known like that, are you?
Mary Cassatt would be later. That would be much later. We're talking about Martin Johnson Heed, James E. Buttersworth, J.F. Pito, people that mostly painted in the mid-19th century, what we call the Hudson River School and the Illuminist School. And Jimmy had a fabulous collection. Examples that I could handle. I could look at them very carefully. I could look at the signatures. I could photograph them.
Let me ask you this really quick, though. Yep. You start painting, but your shopping list is going to be a little bit different than mine, and you're in New York City, and you can't just go buy a canvas at Dick Blick and sell that to a gallery. So what was the process prior to putting a portrait together?
Yeah. That's a great question. Yeah. Because, I always say that a high-class fake is a very complicated construction. And you have to know the process from the beginning. It's very important that it starts the right way and ends up in the right way, because it's going to be examined by a seasoned expert who has looked at hundreds and hundreds of period paintings in his career, maybe thousands, and their eyes are trained to look for all the forensic visuals of what a period painting is and should be. And if you don't have a profound understanding of what makes something antique, the painting will fail. I always say you have to have as much connoisseurship and expertise as the expert to create a great face, because you have to know what they're looking for, what they want, what they expect to see. And also there's a very important psychological component to creating a great fake. And that is that the painting, which is of modern origin, that's masquerading as a period piece of art, has got to have built into it various forensic visuals that will plant subliminal messages into the mind of the expert, even though he may not consciously be looking for specific things, but it will plant subliminal messages in his mind that what he is looking at is a genuine article. It could be as subtle as just certain chalk marks on the back of the painting that signify, faded chalk marks that signify that the painting was booked into an auction sale maybe 2 decades ago, and you could still faintly see some chalk marks of some numbers and letters back there. They might be inconsequential to the casual observer, but to the trained eye, it's sending a message. It's telling a history. The back of the painting tells a story to the trained expert, and a great art forger will be acutely aware of that and build in everything on the back of the canvas that the expert expects to see and make sure it's there ahead of time for his benefit, because you have to succeed with the painting. Forgery is what I like to characterize as a contest of wits between the forger and the expert. If your forgery is successful, the expert will accept the painting as genuine, and the painting will be sold, and the reward will be forthcoming in the form of dollars. But anyway, you have to make like, for instance, to make a 19th century American painting, you have to start with the correct support. Again, the support is the canvas and the stretcher that 19th century American paintings were originally created on. So where am I going to get a stretcher and a canvas to make my fake? It's common sense. You go to antique shops and you find 19th century American paintings of minor value, of which there are thousands of them out there. I could, in one afternoon, walking around the downtown antique shops in New York City, I could find 2, 3, 4 examples. And the stretchers will be period, the canvas will be period, but the painting will be worthless by, some student from the 19th century, some amateur painter of the 19th century. So, in the most simplest form of creating a face, you would buy a painting like that and remove the painting that's on the surface and repaint the surface canvas with a high quality fake, a painting, and then age it and crack it and put a patina on it. And that's a very simplistic way of explaining how to create a fake. But when I was at Jimmy's up there, I had at my disposal many types of paintings by many artists. And I found the types of stretchers certain artists favored, the type of canvas certain artists favored, and they weren't exclusively married to a particular canvas, but generally. And I also discovered something that was very interesting, and that was the use of something called an Academy board. An Academy board was something I had seen in antique shops on minor paintings and never really understood what they were. And they were little cardboard, they were a very stiff cardboard construction that were produced in the 19th century for artists to make their paintings on. One side was gessoed, and the other side, the back side, had what was called, they were painted black. It was called slate paint. And they had a label right in the middle, like DeVoe was a famous manufacturer of these Academy boards, which was a cheap, like a canvas board is sold in an art supply store today. They're cheap, they're on cardboard, and it's just canvas glued onto cardboard. Well, an Academy board was a piece of cardboard. It's a very stiff cardboard, like what's used in book covers. That type of cardboard, but it has gesso on one side. And a lot of important painters from the 19th century used these Academy boards. This was a tremendous enlightenment for me to see examples that Jimmy had in this collection by Pito, by Buttersworth, by Francis, and other mid-19th century American painters. They very frequently used the Academy board for small paintings. Well, it was really very simple for me to go around to local antique shops, even around Jimmy's area up there, around Nyack and Piermont. And I went into local antique shops there, and I found examples of Academy boards, and I sanded off. I mean, it's just common sense. You just sand off the painting that's on there, which was atrocious usually. Maybe I paid $10, $15 for these things. And if they had a good 19th century American frame on them, it might be $100 I would pay for it. But then I would have the frame and the Academy board. And it was very simple after that. All I had to do was sand off the painting, put a nice little Buttersworth on there or a little Pito on there, and put a patina over it and crack it, age it a little, and put it back in the frame. And I could go down to New York City from Nyack. I go down and go to like Herschel and Adler or some other Madison Avenue gallery and walk out with a nice check. It was that easy. And so, getting back to Jimmy Rico, this was a tremendous breakthrough for me because when Jimmy explained to me that he was very amused by what I did. He loved the idea that I faked paintings. He was a bit of a rascal, the old man, and he was a great wit. He was a great intellect. He was very well read and knew everything about art history. He was a fascinating person to meet. And he had lived an extraordinary life. He knew all kinds of famous people in New York City. In his younger days, he went out with the Guggenheim sisters and that type of thing. But he wanted to steer my abilities away from Dutch paintings into 19th century American paintings. And I had a room at his house up there where I could paint, I could study his work, and by having examples at my disposal, that was a big advantage that it gave me to make a great fake, because I could see the canvas, I could see the backs, I could see any old labels that were on the backs of these original paintings that he had. And I could duplicate everything in my own way, at my own leisure. So at this point, after having my dreams of in the contemporary art world dashed because of these evictions that I was going through, and these dislocations, you could say, in my younger life in New York City, after I started making my first sales of 19th century American paintings, this started bringing some very serious money, like $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, which in those days was a lot of money, more money I had ever seen in my life at one time. And at that point, not only did art forgery become a career, but it also became a great intellectual sport for me. I became, I guess in a sense, addicted to taking the risk and lived on the thrill of creating a painting with my own hand and mind and using my ingenuity in such a high degree that I could walk into an important gallery, present a painting, and have it accepted as original. For me, it was an intoxicating thrill. I could hardly describe it. And eventually I started selling my paintings in big auction houses like Sotheby's and Christie's. I eventually branched out internationally to London. And I guess that when I was hitting on all cylinders at one point, I was selling paintings in Sotheby's and Christie's in both New York and London simultaneously. American paintings in New York and British paintings in London. Whatever the market wanted, I made sure I was able to supply their needs. And this went on for a long time, and I sold a great deal of fakes, and sometimes directly to dealers, sometimes to unscrupulous dealers that just paid cash on the barrelhead and wanted paintings and kind of knew what they were. So I worked on many levels, and that was my life for decades, and it gave me a great life. It was anonymous. I was not known by anybody, but I enjoyed that. I liked the covertness of my vocation and my lifestyle. I liked hanging around in London and New York and Miami. Those were my three cities that I enjoyed the most. And Miami was a very exciting city, still is today. You know, it was a very exciting city. And New York, well, that was my first love for a city, growing up in the environs of the city. But I grew to love London as my very favorite city, and a place where I loved doing business. And I loved my time in Britain and the West Country of Britain, Bath and Bristol area. And I sold in auction houses all over Britain, Phillips, Bonhams, Christie's and Sotheby's, and I rotated paintings and collections of paintings among the different auction houses. And at one point, checks were pouring in from all the auction houses, both from New York and London, and all being routed into various accounts that I had. I had accounts set up with the auction houses for automatic payments into various bank accounts, and I spent a lot of time enjoying life and being a patron of the arts. I collected art. But most of all, I mean, it was very exciting for me to sell my paintings and have them accepted that way. But I have to say that most of all, I had a deep and great aesthetic appreciation for paintings. I loved art. I grew to love paintings and art, and spent a great deal of my time in all the great museums and understanding art on a very high level and understanding what makes a painting great, what separates a not so great painting from a truly inspired work. And I developed my connoisseurship to a very high degree, which I still have today, and I'm still developing today. I have I'm flattered sometimes with the people that contact me, even these days, for my opinions about paintings. I wouldn't mention any names, but some of the most recognized experts in the world want to know whether a certain painting on display somewhere is genuine or one of mine.
Well, obviously, you have the eye for it too. I mean, it's your opinion is genuine.
Yes, thank you. I had been told by some very experienced people in the art world that have said to me, Ken, you really have the eye. And in the business, that's a great compliment. It means that you've developed your connoisseurship to a very high degree, and you know what's good. I always say I could walk through the galleries of the Metropolitan, and I've done this with friends that want to take a tour with me. Because I say 70% of the paintings are, well, they're fine paintings, but they're not worth more than a passing glance. But there's the other 30% that are very interesting, and then there's the 10% that are fascinating. And I have friends that want me to point out to them what makes a painting really superlative and what is truly inspired about this painting and what made it a great painting. And I have the ability to do that.
I think one of the more noticeable differences in technique between, let's say, you and John Myatt, John Myatt basically says people get Monet fever and it strikes in their heart. The prospective buyer just can't pass up a good deal. And he says he did his paintings with house paint and KY gel. Basically, that's it, and that was my question with you was, obviously a lot of work and research goes into this because you have to put together a good framework before you put the paint on top of it. But, what's up with what he's saying there? I mean, it's much more detailed and not so simplistic. I don't understand that.
Well, I think what he's really pointing out there is, look, every art forger has their own story and their own area of that they specialize in. He and I give him full credit. I mean, I don't compete with him in any way, and we're in different worlds artistically. But he painted more from paintings from the modern school, and
Impressionism.
And they. I don't know about house painting a Monet. That just doesn't make sense to me.
I know,
but
it doesn't.
I could understand, like certain guys like Jackson Pollock used, Sherwin Williams house paints, the drip dip paints, and stuff like that. So you could he probably discovered that some of the modern artists that he was faking indeed used certain house paints that you could have bought at Pearl's Art Supply that supplied a lot of that stuff to those early modernist painters. So I think he's pointing out that even a valuable piece of art could be made with sometimes the most humble or a hardware store type of materials. In my case, I chose just kind of a difficult path to go in forgery. I forged period paintings, which is an entirely different technical challenge than, say, painting a Picasso or a Modigliani or something like that. Not that those paintings are not cracking at this time, but they don't necessarily have to be correct. I had to figure out methods, and I figured this out not from reading any kind of ideas in books or anything. I had to figure out methods of how to crack paintings, and you could create cracks in paintings easily enough through various artificial methods that will produce artificial cracks. However, they could never pass the scrutiny of an expert at an auction house that's coming to examine. They would be spotted a mile away.
Well, that was the other thing that John says. He would just throw it in the oven, or his accomplice would throw it in the oven.
No, I don't know. Ovens have nothing to do with cracks. It's just a myth. That'll blister a painting. If you want to bubble up a painting and blister it, that's all it will do. And the book that I mentioned that was originally given to me, the work on Van Meegeren, yes, he did indeed use an oven, but it was a very complicated method that he used, and it was a very flawed method. And sometimes it worked with him, sometimes it didn't. However, not to get too deep into the weeds on this, but it is important to note that cracks that occur in the surface of period paintings occur in characteristic patterns that are well recognized by the trained expert. And so, as a forger, you could say, well, I could crack a painting this way or that way. But any kind of a shortcut would create cracks that are not going to follow the pattern that is necessary. The patterns of cracks that occur in period paintings occur over a long period of time. A very common pattern is what I call the spider web pattern, where it's circles within circles, and they're joined by secondary cracks that radiate out from them, and so on. That's one pattern. But how do you make a modern painting that's pretending to be antique in style? How do you make it crack in a characteristic pattern? It's an incredible technical challenge. And I spent a great deal of time in research and experiments and research to finally perfect a method that could perfectly induce cracks to come through a modern painting and form a perfectly natural pattern that an expert would expect to see in a period painting. And that is one of my proudest achievements. And today, I'm still creating what I consider the finest fakes in the world today. I've perfected this to an art form. and can create all the patterns I want, the various patterns that occur in period paintings. I could create them very fine or very bold as they appear in different types of paintings. And I have learned to control the patterns perfectly to mimic the crack. And they don't really mimic the crack. They, what I really do, and I describe this in my book, I simply discovered a way to accelerate the conditions that produce cracks in period paintings that take years or decades to occur in period painting. I have developed a method to accelerate the conditions that create those cracks in a very short period of time. It's as simple as that.
Interesting.
But that's only one element of it. That's
Sure.
just the cracking. Well, first and foremost, you have to create a very fine painting. And I always say to what I like when I want to specialize in a particular painter, I always say the only way you could create a high class take is you have to love the work of the artist to begin with. And that's why I chose my artists carefully. And they were artists that did something to me that I truly appreciated and loved their work, and I wanted to emulate them. I would read about the artists. I would read about their history, their life, the times they lived in, and everything I could about where they painted, how they painted, any clues I could get about their life. I wanted to know the artist. I felt like I knew him as a friend. And I could say that today, the artists that the American painters that I loved so much, Martin Johnson Heade and James E. Buttersworth, who's a very difficult painter. This would be the last painter that a forger would want to forge because he's so difficult. And I have mastered his technique and telemetry and his vision, his artistic vision, to perfection. I create new paintings in their style. And sometimes I have been criticized. I've been criticized by people in the art world that would say to me, well, aren't you doing an injustice to these great painters of the past? And I think that's an absurd charge. I always refute that, and with that if these artists could be brought back to life today, they would be deeply flattered that someone like me spent a life, dedicated my life, is what I've done, to not only appreciate their artistic vision from an aesthetic viewpoint, to have a deep appreciation of their paintings, but was able to train my hand and my eye to duplicate their technique to perfection. I believe they would be so flattered today that someone could carry on their work as I have, that they would look at a lot of my paintings today and say, where would you want me to sign them? And I believe that. I believe that truly. And, the art world today, well, maybe I shouldn't say, because I have to respect all people's appreciation of art, whatever it may be. But what I see going on in the art world today, I'm sorry, but I just have to say it's lost. It's absurd. It's just it's preposterous. And therefore, I feel that my work as an artist is even more valid today, emulating these great painters and carrying on their tradition with new creations today to show people in a world that has gone directionless in art, to try to bring back some sanity, some value, some skill, some aesthetic beauty and appreciation, and to stand for that today. And that's what I do.
And I think most artists were lifelong students as well as teachers.
Yes. I mean, all the great painters, not all, but most of the great painters, what did they do? Look at Jacques-Louis David, one of the greatest painters in history, 18th century French, one of the greatest painters of all, and a man that I loved so much. He was a great teacher, and he tried to steer his pupils in the direction of carrying on his very style, his neoclassical style, and he did indeed bring forth a couple of them. That one of them in particular, who died a young age, you could very much mistaken his work for David's hand himself. So Titian did it. All these great painters, they wanted to have students that could carry on their work. Well, I did the same thing. And, I had one of the greatest experts that we have living in America today. I won't mention his name, but he is truly acknowledged as the greatest living expert in 19th century American painting. And he called me, complimented me, and he so enjoyed my book. And he said, even though I can't agree with art forgery, he said, you did a great service. And he gave me this compliment. He said, you brought to the attention so many great painters that are being forgotten today. And I've gotten hundreds of emails since the publication of my book from readers that enjoyed my book. Say, I go to museums now, and I know who James E. Butterworth is, and I know who Martin Johnson Heath is, and others as well. And I could now look at their works and appreciate them. Otherwise, if I didn't read your book, I wouldn't even have known who they were. So that has been my career for over 30 years. It ended, unfortunately, when the FBI paid me a visit back in the 1990s, and I came under a withering investigation that dragged on for 5 years. It never ended in any kind of charges being brought against me, and it never stopped me from creating fakes. And today, I'm more prolific than ever. My pictures are more deceptive than ever, but they're sold perfectly legally as forgeries. And where they'll be a decade from now, who knows?
I think it's worth noting, too, that there's another guy out there an American forger, Mark Landis. His story is remarkable, but neither one of you have spent a day in jail, and you're still both producing a lot of artwork. And what do you attribute to that? I mean, how does that work? I'd love to get on that track.
Well, after a lifetime of investing my artistic skills in the development of beautiful paintings, which I enjoy myself, why quit now? Just because my activities have come to light, it actually has put me into a different artistic sphere, you might say. It is true that I miss my covert life in the art world. It is true that I miss the intoxicating thrill of seeing my paintings in the auction house catalogs and sitting in at a sale whenever I could. It is true that I miss the thrill of taking risk, which can become addictive. And all these things may be so, but it's also true that I enjoy creating beautiful old masters today, and developing my skill to even greater heights than I even thought possible in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when I was most active in that phase of my career. So I've simply graduated to another level. As I said, it's not covert anymore, but I have a new appreciation from a new class of people that collect my paintings. I wouldn't mention where some of my paintings are hung today. They're purchased perfectly legally, but it's a joy to have people that appreciate them and understand that they could hang them in some of these exalted venues and entertain their sophisticated guests from society and so on, and people never question that the paintings that are displayed in their houses or institutions are in fact fakes created by me.
I think one of the fun things in my life that I do during the summer, I hit yard sales, and people have seen me do this, and they always ask me why. But you know, if I go to one that has a couple of paintings, I always pick it up and I look at the back first. And the reason, because I just love to see, there's some character back there and it tells a story. And I love that about a painting, and I'll buy it for the back first, you know, and even though I may like the front later, the back comes first. But did you design your book cover? Because I love that book cover.
No, I didn't, and it never occurred to me to use the back of a painting. It was designed by my publisher. They had a book jacket meeting, and I was putting forth ideas of using one of my fakes, you know, or a detail from one of Martin Johnson, you know, which was the logical thing. And it never occurred to me that it was a brilliant idea. It was enigmatic. Sure, use the back of the painting, not the front. And when they showed that to me, I said, "Oh boy!" They gave me, you know, several to choose from. And as soon as I saw that, of course, that's a great idea. And Claiborne Hancock, my publisher, said, "Yes, everybody here on the staff thought this was the number one choice, but we wanted to see what you felt about it." So, but I couldn't take credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, I see that, and it would make me grab that book, you know, in an airport or wherever. Talk about the book for a minute, and what does that book mean to you and your career as an art forger?
Well, what it really means to me was the beginning and end of one life that I had. It was something that was never planned, as I said in the beginning. It was a life that it seemed to evolve on its own. One thing led to another. I had an extraordinary run where I lived a life that was filled with a lot of money and freedom, and it was exciting, and I had lots of great experiences with all kinds of interesting people and friends that were my own age, and going out in New York City in the 90s and going to clubs and having a lot of. It was really, for me, it all came to an end, as I said, in the 80s. And I realized at one point that my life as I knew it for 30 years had come to an end. My life that started out when I was 17 without any direction or any idea of what I was going to do, what I was going to become. Fate just put me in a right place at the right time to trigger off or discover, I should say, a hidden talent that if I hadn't have met Tom Daly and his friends in Fort Lee that introduced me to the art world, to this day, I don't think I ever would have explored art or ever realized that I had an ability to paint. So I had a lot of luck. It developed on its own due to circumstances. I met Jimmy Rico. From that point on, I went, went into the stratospheres of the art world selling my painting. But I knew it came to an end, and I knew my life as I knew it was over. So I figured, well, why not put it down to posterity? Because that's one, and see where I go from here. So it was an inflection point, and then I had to recalibrate my life and reinvent myself as a forger, which I did, and now it's even more rewarding in a different way.
A remarkable story. Thanks for sharing. My guest in the studio tonight has been Ken Perenyi, author of Caveat Emptor, The Secret Life of an American Forger. Ken, where do we buy the book, and where can people find you online?
It can be bought on Amazon and online. My collections could be viewed at my website, kenperenyi.com.
Ken Perenyi, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.